had some opening
Yes.
introductory words.
So I wanted to introduce what we're doing today by going very much back to basics. At the end of today, hopefully, you will have started already a comprehensive sales and marketing plan. And hopefully today, you will leave knowing what a comprehensive sales and marketing plan looks like, and will have made some progress in starting it for your company. That's an ambitious goal. And as many of you know, the business world is full of business phrases: inbound marketing, outbound marketing, content marketing, sales channels, sales leads, sales nurturing, sales rating. What we're going to try to do is help you understand the method of thinking that it's all about. Because in the end, it's quite simple. Despite all of the jargon, despite all of the sophisticated tools and worksheets that we'll be working through, at the end of the day, it's a very simple human-based thing. You've got information and you've got messages, and you want to deliver them to the right person at the right time so that that person makes a decision based on what you say. That's everyday life. That's what happens all the time in the world. In a business, that gets systematized. In a business, that gets tested and refined over time. In a business, it gets intentional and planned. But you always have to remember that it is as simple as me trying to get you to understand what I say, and for me to persuade you to have the outcome that I want, namely, you become my customer. So one of the things that's important is to understand that this workshop is all about communication. Marketing and sales is all about communication. That very simple interaction between two human beings: information, message, decision-making, outcome. That's what this is all about. And therefore, the more we understand about how people make decisions, about how they make choices, the better we're going to be able to influence those decisions, to influence those choices, and win customers. Now, as entrepreneurs, with many different stages, some of you have been in business for a couple of years, some of you in business only a short period of time, and you are the founders. You are the early staff. You are the ones who are going to build this business. And in your world, you are what? In love with your product. You know all of the benefits and all of the features, and you just envision in your mind, if somebody else understood these great benefits that we've got, they're going to buy. Doesn't happen that way. That's not the sales process. That's not marketing. That's you talking to you. So the benefits of your product are really less important to your customers than the problems that you solve for them. Now, those are two sides of the same coin. The benefits are definitely the solution to the problem. But you can communicate that in terms of all the benefits, or you can communicate it in terms of my fear about problems, my pain about problems, the suffering and difficulties and challenges that I have because of the problems. The benefits solve it, but in communicating it, one of the things that's important is that people are more apt to decide yes if they're avoiding a risk, avoiding a pain, avoiding a challenge or a suffering, than they are if they're pursuing a gain. Now that's a very subtle point, but it's the core of everything. It's why in your venture development work, your mentors, the service providers, the program venture development professionals who have been helping you have made you focus on your value proposition and what is the problem you solve. It's because solving problems is more motivating than gaining benefits. So, and therefore, communicating, you need to communicate your benefits in a way that addresses people's fears and pains rather than their gains and the benefits that they might want to get. And so pause on that for a minute. Success in communicating to help somebody decide to be your customer means that your messages need to address their pain and their suffering that you can resolve with your product. Therefore, you need to know about them. Everything is knowing about how your customer thinks, feels, what they're worried about, what they are anxious about, what their goals are, what their measures of success are. It's not about your product anymore. It's about them. And secondarily, you interface your product with what's going on there. So, to put it simply, people strongly prefer to avoid a loss than to acquire a gain. If your sales pitch to me is, I will get this benefit and that benefit and that benefit, when I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, that would be nice. If your sales pitch to me is, you're going to avoid that problem, you're going to avoid that loss, you're going to avoid that challenge and that fear and that failure, I'm thinking, I really need this. And if you can see that difference, that's the point about how people make decisions. And one way of looking at it is, if you had an opportunity to introduce an action that would save people's lives and also avoid people dying, if the problem gets framed in terms of saving people's lives, then you're going to be less interested in taking risks because you don't want to fail. But if the problem is framed as avoiding people dying, then you're going to be more interested in taking risks because that's what you want, is to avoid that horrible consequence. So you could set it up so that the decision is equal, that the chances of saving lives is the same as the chances of avoiding deaths. And people will change the way they make the decision based on whether they see the problem as avoiding a loss or pursuing a gain. Anyway, we will return to that many times. So getting back to basics again, communicating your message to help somebody make a decision, knowing that when they make a decision, they prefer to avoid losses. Gains are nice, but avoiding losses is gotta. That's a different motivator. And then the other factor about human decision making that affects you as entrepreneurs is that if I make a mistake, I'm your customer and you're giving me the pitch, and I make a mistake by deciding to do nothing, the consequences for me are far less than if I make a mistake of doing something and then it ends up being a failure. What that means is I don't want to take the risk of doing something new. Everything's okay right now. Yeah, we've got problems. Yeah, I understand. You could give me benefits and gains, but it's not risky. If I make a risk and become your customer and adopt your product, if it goes wrong, I'm in trouble. If I just keep doing what I'm doing and we still got all the problems we got, I'm not so much in trouble. So many of you have products that are new, that you need to convince people to disrupt the status quo, to do something different than they're doing now. And if you make that argument in terms of the benefits, you're less likely to succeed. If you make that argument in terms of avoiding losses and avoiding problems, you're more likely to succeed. And you've got a challenge of getting them past inertia, past doing nothing. And on that, I'm going to pass over.
All right. I think that we have spoken through that slide. So what I would like to ask you at this point is, thinking of the top 10 reasons that startups fail, and some of you are no doubt serial entrepreneurs, and you have failed in the past, and you know folks who have failed. Name the most important. What do you think the most likely reason is that there is failure?
The number one reason entrepreneurs fail is they lack understanding of how their customers think. So, lack of understanding of the market.
Lack of understanding of the market. Excellent. Are there others? Okay. Excellent. Absolutely. Very important. Oui. Okay. Very good. Okay. All right. One more. Is there anyone else? One more.
Hi, my name is Wafat Abdul. I'm the founder of MTY Intelligence Software. One of the most important reasons, I think, is that the idea is not coherent with the ecosystem existing.
Excellent. And how old is your firm, since you didn't have a chance to do your introduction?
Sorry, I didn't.
Combien des années de votre entreprise?
Well, we founded our startup 3 years ago, and we founded our company 1 year ago.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So this is the chart, and everything that everybody has said, I think, is in the top 5. I will say that we have given this presentation, this is the 3rd time in the last 4 days. I'm sorry? Oh, am I not in the picture? Okay. I will sit down. I am used to teaching classes and walking around the classroom. Sitting still is very difficult, but I will give it a shot. Can I be heard in these both? Should I turn this one off at this point, or are we okay?
He's the camera guy, which is the sound guy that you have to.
Okay, all right. So all of you have mentioned the most important elements, and as I was saying, we have done this is the 3rd time we have done this workshop, and none of the other workshops got as far as you did, so you are doing the best, which is very good news for the rest of the day. So clearly, building someone no one wants, which was mentioned, and failing to exercise on sales and marketing. If you put those together, then that is 40 to 50% of the reason that businesses fail. And I believe you will receive a copy of this presentation, is that correct? Okay, so you can certainly take pictures, but don't worry, you will also receive a copy. This is another chart that shows the same. And how many of you have used a tool like this, a one-page canvas? I think probably almost everybody, yes, good.
And we use this particularly to show the importance of the value, the characterizations between the value proposition and the client segments, and the ways in which you have a relation to your client and the channels that you will use to communicate with your client. All of you have used this. These are, as you know, the most important parts of how you do your startup. And it is the data that you have already accumulated that you are going to use in our sheets to be able to discover your customers better, to define your customers better, to define the relationships you have, and also to make pivots. And I think somebody mentioned we started out with large businesses, was that you? And that did not go so well. They already have the solution they need. The pain, they do not have the pain that we want to solve for. And so now you've changed to another customer segment, which is a very useful way of thinking about using both your Canvas, your one-page business tool, and using that information to go into the sheets that we will be going through. And all of you know how you fill that out. When we use our canvases in the States, and perhaps you use it this way as well, this of course is an example of Facebook. The canvas is 10 years old, so every big company has a canvas online, tens of canvases. So having the value proposition that you bring to your particular customer segment in a certain color. And remember, these are with little stickies. It's iterative, you move them around. So you have, for example, the value proposition of Facebook connecting with friends. The customer segment is internet users. How does the relationship work? How do the channels work? Another segment is social engagement and social context for advertisers and marketers. And then you have a different way of connecting with those. So this is merely to demonstrate that if you are using your Canvas tool, as many do on an iterative basis, if in your office you come in and you say, I've changed my value proposition, how does that change the rest of my Canvas? Then perhaps coloring it in the segments would help you to make those pivots that might be necessary. So this is another example, the Google example. So again, the value proposition. It's not only just the benefits that you perceive, the things that you are passionate about, you know, as a technician or as an innovator, that you have this long list of features that you know are the solution. You have to think about how is this new and disruptive for your clients? How is it better than other things? So your differentiators, of course, you've already thought of this. How do you differentiate between others in your market? And the more innovative your product is, the less there will be existing competitors. But remembering all the time that the competition is whatever your customer does now. Maybe they don't use somebody else, but they do have some solution to their problem. So when you frame what you're doing for your customer segment, it has to be in the context of, you have not used my product before. Think always of what your customer is thinking. This is a list that all of you are very familiar with, but again, you will receive a copy of it. The customer pain and the pain relievers. You might want to make this list specific to your own market. If I am bringing to a brand new market a wedding registry online, I think then, what are the reasons, what are the pains that a new couple are about to embark on a marital experience? What pains do they feel, which will be alleviated by your product? And of course, you have already thought of this, but People take less time, people can easily list what they want, they don't get 17 different sets of silverware or whatever, but they will get precisely what they want, all of the benefits. And that particular example, of course, you would fill out what are the pains that a new couple will feel, and how do you relieve those. Of course, for a medical device, a very different set of pains, but the medical device is particularly interesting because it enters a world where the people who feel the pain the most might not be the people who pay for the equipment. And I'm sure you've thought of that. And this gets me to an example that I have brought to all of the workshops. It's highly relevant to a technology sphere, but it's also relevant to any sphere in which the end user is not paying for your product. And that is also true. I think somebody had a book publishing, yeah, okay. So perhaps the materials that you produce are not purchased by your end user. So this is the example that I give. My father is an inventor, and he created something called a free piston Stirling engine. And if anybody is an engineer, they may have heard about it in class. But don't worry about that. That's the point is that it is an engine which can do many interesting things. And one of the interesting things it can do is it is extraordinarily reliable, and it can take electricity and produce cold. So there is a spin-out company named Global Cooling, run by a CEO named Mr. Lane. And Mr. Lane makes low-temperature freezers. Who uses low-temperature freezers? Research institutions, big universities, medical researchers. Why do they use them? Because they have ongoing experiments in which they have vials of biological product that they research, they store, they do other things with, they store again. And so it is extremely important from the perspective of a researcher that these vials of product are kept at a very consistent temperature for very long periods of time, years and years. So Mr. Lane at first thought, my low temperature freezer, I will sell it to these researchers. So he goes to big universities and he talks to the very important researchers with tens of years of experience. And he says, this is incredibly reliable. You will never have a freezer fail. Unlike my competitors, your freezers will not fail with this technology. And the researchers were delighted. This was the most important pain they felt. And Mr. Lane said, and it is extremely efficient. In fact, it is so efficient that when you use the electricity to run our freezer, the competitor could have given you their freezer for free, and my freezer would still cost less because the cost of electricity is so much more for the competitor's freezer. The researcher did not find this interesting. That was not a pain for the researcher, because in great big research institutions, the researchers get external funding or internal funding, and the cost of electricity is always in the fringe costs. It's always in a bottom line that they put in automatically. It is not something that they are thinking about. Furthermore, the researchers themselves do not purchase their freezers. Therefore, despite the fact that Mr. Lane's product was incredibly important for the researchers, he was not selling into the right customer segment. So he thought, okay, who buys freezers? It is the CFO of the company. So he went to the CFO and he said, these are incredibly reliable, he started, incredibly reliable low temperature freezers. And the CFO said, okay, but this is not my problem. I have lots of researchers. I have lots of people funding my grants. If one researcher loses 10 years of work, the institution might suffer, but I'm a big institution. I have plenty of other researchers and they can start it all over again. Very shocking to Mr. Lane, because of course for the researchers, this was the biggest pain. And then Mr. Lane said, and buying the competitor's product, if they give it to you for free, mine will still be cheaper. The CFO thought that was amazing. So Mr. Lane had found his customer segment, but not where he thought that he would. So this goes precisely to the question of how do you very carefully define your customer segments, How do you differentiate between who the end user is and who is actually paying for your product? We had an entrepreneur in Marrakesh, perhaps somewhat the same as yours, who was in the business of making new curriculum for children. And the children benefited from it, the teachers benefited from it, but neither of those paid for it. And so he had to be talking to school administrators. So he had to have a very complicated message that indicated that not only was it an excellent product, but that it was going to be appropriate for a brand new entry into a curriculum, and that the administrator's budget could handle that. So that's some of what I've been talking about, that creating gains for customers. There are a lot of different ways, and you will think about this specific to your own product. You can save time, you can delight them, you can make their lives easier, you can get rid of barriers, but all of these things are general, theoretical, all of them have implications for your own particular products. So your value proposition, and this is going back to the Canvas tool. You are probably aware that the Canvas tool is part of an approach to business called lean launch. Are you familiar with that term? Some of you are nodding. So what lean launch says is, we want to start iteratively. We want to start quickly, and we want to fail fast if we are going to fail. We want to understand why we failed. We want to pivot if we fail. We want to cease and start something new if we really fail. Or we want to persevere. We want to carry on. So the lean launch says, do this quickly, rather than writing a big business plan, going to the bank for a loan. A year down the road, you realize, I misidentified my customer segment and I have run out of money. So lean means quick and facile and agile. So using lean launch, part of the premise is that you think about your value proposition and you test it. You have what they call a minimally viable product. Is that a term that's familiar? So a prototype, something that you can bring to your market quickly and very rapidly assess how your market is going to feel about it. And part, again, of lean launch is customer discovery. You, with your minimally viable product, you find out, you discover things about your customer segment. Do they like it? Is it matching their pain? Are they the people who pay for it? Are those really the gains that I thought they were getting from it? Am I, like Mr. Lane, not targeting the correct customer? So part, again, of this principle, the lean launch principle of which the Canvas is a part, is what they call customer interviews, or, quote, get out of the building. If you have been in an accelerator, you may have heard this phrase. I can see some people nodding. So this means that the very first thing you do, you sit there with your brilliant idea, you go out of the building and into the space where your customers live. That might be calling them on the phone, it might be going through the streets, it might be going into the research institutions or the hospitals, it might be talking to folks who are just getting married, and you say, I'm going to adjust my product on the basis of interviewing my potential customer segment. And I'm going to redefine my value proposition on the basis of what I find out, not just from myself, my 3 friends, and the one person who put some money in, but on the basis of people that I have never met before, on the basis of my friend's uncle who has this problem, who happens to be a CFO, who happens to be getting married, and I'm going to talk to them. They don't know me, but they're hearing about my product. I'm looking in their eyes and I'm thinking, do they really see this as a fit for their problem? And so that is what you want to do with testing your value proposition. Now this is a joke. So clearly, a lot of money was spent to make a very fancy gate and a very fancy barrier. But what happens? People walk around it.
Now, we've all seen this, and this is precisely what you are trying to avoid. You're defining your value, you're defining your customer segments, and you're testing your market. And you're putting out a minimally viable product and seeing if that will work before carrying on with a significant amount of funding. This is what I have just gone through to explain, again, that the use of the business model canvas, which you have already done, to make these problem solution equations, to talk about your potential customer segments, is, in my opinion, an extraordinarily valuable thing to do at the very start. So I'm going to stop boring you with my voice at this point, just for a moment, and let John talk a little bit more about customer segments.
The neat thing about the business model canvas, especially for companies that are, past the early stage and are beginning to enter the market, is that you're familiar with testing your product against the market. The point that we're trying to make is that the same method of thinking applies to your marketing messages and your sales strategies. The first customer discovery is to go out and make sure that you've got the right product for the market, that you're building the right minimally viable product. Now that you have, you're still not finished testing and changing. But now what you're testing are your messages and your sales strategies, and testing them against the customer. Therefore, distinguishing the different segments of your customers is an exercise you've already done, and you've already, adjusted your value proposition to those customer segments. Now, you're going to use that same method of thinking to apply to your messaging and your sales strategy. Now, once I've individuated my customer segments, I need to adapt my message to the different segments. The reason why you distinguished among different segments is because they experience the problem differently, that they have a distinct interest in what you've got to offer. And that means you communicate to them in a different way. And so in individuating your customer segments, you've done that, and you've identified how your product fits their world. Now what you're trying to do is test how your messaging and your sales strategy hit that world. So you think about the distinction between marketing and sales. In the business jargon, marketing and sales are often used in the same phrase, as if they are the same thing. But they're not. If you go back to the business model canvas, I'm going the wrong way. There we go. Your segments on the far side, the relationship part, that's marketing. That's branding. That's communicating. That's who must I be in order for you to say yes to my message and my information and become my customer. That's my brand. That's my relationship with you. That's marketing. The channels are your sales strategy. How do I reach you? Where do you get your information? What messages do you listen to? What channel can I use to communicate with you? And the point is, just as you tested your value proposition against the segments, so too you test your branding and your relationship against the segments, and you do that to each and every one of the distinctions that you've developed. So at the end of the day, when you walk away with a sales and marketing plan, you're going to have a distinct marketing message for each segment and a distinct sales strategy for each segment. And that's where we're going with this. Now, one of the jargons in the business world is the B2C and the B2B. Many companies have both. Many companies are businesses that sell to consumers, and they're also businesses that sell to other businesses. And in identifying your customer segments, when you did so on the basis of your value proposition and your product, you were trying to adjust the product to the segment. Now, you're going to look at those segments and you're going to need to discover new information to help you not make your product fit, but make your marketing fit, make your messaging and your information fit, and make your sales strategies fit. So in doing that with consumers, demographics are now important. What they call psychographics are now important. If you're aiming for a certain age group, knowing how they make decisions, knowing what information is important to them, knowing where they get their information is market intelligence, knowledge about your customer that will inform your sales and marketing strategy. With business to business, it's a bit different. Here, demographics count, but they're different demographics. They're where are they located, what sector, and what is their competitive world. Companies have characteristics. Companies have cultures. Some are very adverse to risk. Some are not so adverse to risk. Knowing that about the companies that you're marketing to is important in framing your message, framing the problem, and figuring out your sales channels. Faith already pointed out who buys. That's important. So, part of developing a systematic, comprehensive sales and marketing plan is to have a profile of each of your customer segments with relevant information to your messaging and your channels. And then at the end of the day, you'll be developing statements for each of those channels. And again, in the same spirit of lean launch, these are hypotheses that you will be testing over time as your business grows, and they'll get better and better and better. One way to think of what we're doing is, as the entrepreneur, you've been doing everything. Every aspect of the business is your responsibility. And you've made some traction in your marketplace. You've got some validation. You've got some success. In order to become a gazelle, you need to scale. In order to become a gazelle, you need to grow sales more quickly and more cheaply and exponentially. 20% increase this year over last, 30% this year over last. A steep sales growth. You know how to make the sale. You've done it already. But as your business grows, you're not the one who's going to be doing it. As your business grows, you're going to become more and more like a corporate CEO and less like an entrepreneur. I do everything. More and more, you're going to manage other people. You're going to rely on other people to convey your identity, to express your brand, to maintain your relationships with your customers, to use the right sales channels. And for that, you need to systematize what you know and what you've learned into a plan and a strategy that will enable you to train and manage others who will be doing the work. And so much of what we're doing today, you've already got the answers to the questions. I know my market segments. I know what makes them tick. I know what they're worried about. I know how to adjust my message to them. Great. But what happens when you are no longer on the front line cultivating and nurturing your sales leads and turning them into customers? What happens when you hire some kid right out of college to do that work for you? You need to be able to convey to your staff your knowledge, transfer it to them, hold them accountable for it, give them the tools they need to do it the way you want it done. And that's the purpose of developing a comprehensive sales and marketing plan. Well, anyway, getting back to the segments, because it's where you start, who are they? Who's in the room? Who do I have to talk to? How do they buy? The authorizing environment. In the book publishing industry, that one successful business that I had that, had that scaling and gazelle, that was in the book business. That was, operated a chain of retail bookstores before Amazon. When Amazon and the internet came along, bookstore retailing changed. But at any rate, we were talking yesterday about, and Faith mentioned, an entrepreneur who had educational materials to help teachers in their classroom. The end user, the teacher. The beneficiary, the students. Maybe parents also benefit. And the teachers really like it. They really want it. But there's an authorizing environment. They're not allowed to make those decisions. Somebody else has to say, all right, we'll try this. And that person has different problems. The benefits and features of your curriculum, of your book to the end user are important, but they're not primarily important to the person making the authorizing decision. That person might be more worried about stakeholders in their environment. What will my superintendents think of my decision? What will this do to my budget? I will be trying something out. What if it doesn't work? What will happen to me then? Things like that are not the concerns of the teacher. They're the concerns of the authorizer, the decision maker for the pitch. So think about creating a tool that conveys that information to your staff. You're talking to the teacher. The teacher wants to know all the benefits and neat stuff that will happen in the classroom. The librarian wants to know that people will be very interested in this book and that the identity of the library will be enhanced by them having it and that they'll be responsive to the needs of their stakeholders. But when you're talking to the decision maker who controls the budget, that's a different profile and a different message. And so you need to be able to give to your staff training and tools that help them decide what message to give to whom. And that's all what that's all about. So what matters to them and who influences them, this is the profile that you need in order to identify what are the right channels to reach them.
So we're now going to do 2 exercises and engage the group in them. The first one is a fairly brief one. The second one gets into a little more detail. I do want to just check on time. Do you have certain segments where you expect us to break for coffee or something, or what is your... At 11. Okay, excellent. Okay. Then we have time for both of these exercises. So the value proposition, every single one of you, when we went down around the room, provided your value proposition, provided your customer segments, maybe said a word about your differentiators, and talked about how old your business, your enterprise was. So we have this formula that as we start to target our specific messages to our specific customer segments, it helps us to think through a 1 or 2 or 3 sentence value proposition, as John was saying, that is particularly devoted to a particular segment. So as an example, if I was thinking about Mr. Lane and the low temperature freezer, I could say, for the chief financial officer of major research institutions who wants to ensure that the budget is as efficiently put together and low cost as possible, our low temperature freezer is a way to enhance the budgetary capacity, reduce the current costs of electricity, that solves the problem of electrical costs and reliability for researchers. Unlike the competition, it is highly reliable, it is very low cost, and we deliver our solution in a way that ensures that you could get the alternative product for free and still not achieve the cost solution that is needed. So that uses that framework
to, I hope succinctly, was more than 3 sentences, to define precisely for the CFO what the solution is. So I'm wondering whether anybody is willing to try to do this with their product. Does anybody want to try putting their product into this frame for a particular customer segment? I know, for example, and I don't want to force you to do it, but the gentleman who had pivoted. Oh, is there a volunteer? Okay.
So, for entrepreneurs and small businesses, we want to get things done, like for example, the website or the sign logo. Our services in the marketplace, website. Our offer is a list of the different profiles of freelancers with different prices and with different skills and years of practice. So the problem is the entrepreneur or the small business doesn't have to look for accounts or people, so they will find them in the marketplace. Like competition, we offer guarantees. So if, for example, if the service is not delivered in time or as the client expected, so we can refund the client. Our service, like I said, is website or freelance marketplace. We solve the problem. So problem of the security, so the client can be refunded problem first. Plus, it's cheaper than if the entrepreneur or the small business works with an agency or a business. And yes, that's our
Excellent. Very well done. So you did an excellent job of listing through every single thing, that the pains, the gains, the solution, the differentiators. And the advantage, of course, of writing all of this out is that when you have your sales staff who are just out of college and unfamiliar with your product, they have a script, right? And so they have perhaps a different script depending on the nature of the client. Okay, thank you very much for your bravery in putting that out. Is there a very different kind of product who might be willing to try this out, just this framework? Ah, excellent.
I will talk about our B2C product. It's an app that makes kids read more books. So our customer segment are families, and the kids when they will use the app, they can read almost 200 books per year instead of 10 books per year. So our customer segment are families, and I think that I see that our products are not is not like solving the pain, but it's like vitamin. So families here don't see that that is should and must read books and love reading. So they just want their kids to be good at school. So they just see our product as vitamin and not painful. So the product or our service is an app that the concept is read, play, win. So families put some gift for their kids, and they tell them you can get this gift after reading 5 years. So the kids read the paper book and go to the app, answer the quiz, and after that, the parents will receive notification that your kids read and understand 5 books. You can give them a gift. Maybe one of the problems that parents want their kids not to use technology and iPads, so we make their kids to go to the paper books. And then come back to the app, play on it, and go again to the paper books. So this is what we offer. And the problem that we solve, as I said, that we make kids enjoying reading. The competitions are in games. So kids just want to play games, and those are the apps that don't have relation with reading, but they just break our mind. Uh, Maybe let's say the series game. It's a game that contains some good information, and because for kids sometimes it's boring to read only a book and not play. So yeah, we bring it to the market in cheaper and faster solution. Uh,
Excellent. So there was a lot of information in there, and I heard a lot of potential pains that your clients might respond to. You were saying that perhaps the parents think of this only as a vitamin,
yeah,
but vitamins bring good health.
yeah,
And so this is a healthy education as opposed to time-wasting entertainment. You know, you might have that contrast. These are not iPads, these are educational devices. What else did I hear? That the parents are heavily involved in rewarding. So there's that parental oversight of the education. So I think that's, you have all of the information. I think that honing it down, what are the most important things the parents want to hear? I think also I heard some sales points for the children. So if the children are there when you're giving this pitch, or your salespeople are giving this pitch, making sure that they know that it's fun and that they get a reward. But anyway, I heard a lot of information that could be detailed out to make a very short pitch. Did you have anything?
Yeah, definitely. One of the challenges going forward, sure you already have made progress on this, is differentiating between different kinds of parents and adjusting messages to different interests that parents have. Now, I don't know, and that's the point. The point is that we need to go and find out from the customer, but a hypothesis might be a highly educated parent might be moved by a different messaging than a parent who has hopes and aspirations for their children, but who themselves are not very educated. So your methodology is based on science for behavior modification and helping children derive rewards and benefits to encourage certain behavior, and describing how that works for a very highly educated parent might make them believe and want. Talking about that for a very low educated parent would not have any effect. So one way of developing a comprehensive marketing plan is to think, what are the different distinctions among the parents that are relevant to how we talk to them? And that's customer segmentation and discovering what moves them. If I am hoping that the life of my children is better than mine, and I'm counting on education to give them that tool, then I've got a fear that their lives won't be better than mine, that I won't have passed on to the next generation new opportunities. Badly, playing on that fear is a sales technique.
Making them feel they have that pain.
and that you can alleviate it.
Right.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much for both of those. I would like to go on now to the next slide. And this is an activity there is a sheet for it in the handouts. Does everybody have the handouts at this point? Okay. So hopefully it is in that document.
Is there a display as to what it looks like? No.
No.
That's too bad.
Yeah.
Hold it up. Do you have a copy?
I do.
Maybe just describe it if you don't have a copy. That seems
So
to be
it does have the words at the top that are...
That's the slide deck.
Yeah.
No, we were just checking that. This is the one that we do not have a.
Oh, wait a minute. Right, sorry.
No. Here, I'll do that with two hands. That's it.
Okay. I believe it looks like this. For those.
No.
Nope. I believe it's this one. Customer segment worksheet. Is it in there? Perhaps it's not in there. Okay. All right.
We don't have it.
We are
Describe.
going to do this verbally, with apologies. We will get to all of the worksheets. I'm sorry, we had not seen a copy of the. Oh, we do have it. Okay. Well, we can hand it out, but it is quite simple, and it contains the information that is on this slide. So we are asking you to list out your customer segments, and you don't have to have very many. You
Just
can
one.
choose to work with just one. We will be asking for 3 or 4 examples, just using one per enterprise. Characterize it, and by that I mean you are saying, what is it about that segment that you are going to be working with? Do they want to save money? Do they want to improve their children's education? Do they want to have better delivery of infused drugs, just to try to use the examples that people have identified. Identify the pain that segment feels. And here, remember that this is not about your pain as the entrepreneur. This is putting yourself in their shoes. This is thinking about what the market segment feels is painful to them. Are they finding it painful that their children are always playing games? Are they finding it painful that their patients are suffering from drug delivery in inadequate ways? Identify their gain. Think about the young married couple and how relieved they will be when they have this particular product that you're giving them online. And just briefly note down the value proposition, your value proposition, perhaps using the former examples for whom, what is it, unlike what, that reflects the pains and gains for that segment. So what I would ask you to do is just do one of these, and then we will ask for 2 or 3 examples from the room, and we will be able to end by our break time of 11 o'clock. So let's give it just a few minutes to work through, and then I will be asking for volunteers.
vous a prévenu que c'était interactif. Il n'y a pas de. Voilà, il n'y a pas de surprise. You understand French very well?
Yes. Well, I understand it.
Doing very well.
If you do, that's
Don't
fine.
type the layout of the room.
No, I don't. Yeah.
Nothing else was available.
Oh, yeah, right. No, that's fine.
As long as the message
It's right. Yes. Well, as long as we are meeting what people want to hear, right? Do you think that this is at the right level? Okay.
quite sophisticated.
Oh, yeah. No, I was thinking perhaps they are more sophisticated than this message. Okay.
It's fine.
Okay.
It's difficult to work out to bring here. Exactly same.
Right. Because people are, they differ.
It's not just the students. Idea. Apple says marketing problems and they want to.
Thanks.
How is it going there? How do you find it?
It seems to be
We're doing fine.
okay from this perspective, yeah.
I think we're going to deliver a lot by the time we're done.
People actually seem to be engaged. Yes. Right.
I'm around, obviously, and I'm reachable by mail.
Yeah.
But you have Sabrina.
Yes, she's sitting in the front.
So we have that person who was sending this t-shirt. It's a great t-shirt.
Yes.
So they are the local staff members.
Okay,
like,
excellent.
Like Sukaina, like
Yes.
they
Okay.
are the Sukaina show.
Oh, they are this. Okay.
I wonder
Excellent.
if is the hotel on fire?
I am wondering. Yes, is this something we should be concerned about?
There's a member of the hotel.
They have just opened the door.
Right, the one that says stop.
It was in fire. It had just happened.
Ah, yikes!
Okay, well, thank you. I know that it has been quite long.
Ah,
It has felt like a long week.
I'm sure you will get some rest days back home.
Well, probably
No.
not, but that's okay. This
Yeah.
has been wonderful. So.
yeah.
I know that today is Sunday.
Yes. Well, you know. Uh-oh. Don't want it to fall in my lap. I'll get out of your way.
Ah, thank you.
Thank you.
This is a lot of microphones.
Yeah, it is.
Gotcha. And use this one when I'm here? Oh, I can do this one? Gotcha. Oh,
This is the camera
I
mic.
see.
Okay.
I understand. One's for the film, one's for the room. I gotcha.
So what we do at time? So is this at 11 o'clock? Is this just a coffee break and then they come back? And how long will it be? Okay, so the coffee break is what, 10 minutes?
15 minutes.
15 minutes? Then they come back, and then we go until 12:30?
Yes.
And then it's an hour. And where is the lunch? Okay, so it's, okay, excellent. Okay, everyone is very hard at work, but I am going to ask for some brave volunteers who are going to help train each other. So is somebody willing to explain their first customer segment? All right. So everybody listen, and we will get to your customer segments. Listen, and we will all comment on his explanation. Let's see.
And
We have two. Yeah, we're good.
Donc pour rentrer dans le site, j'ai identifié deux segments principaux. Le premier, c'est les grandes entreprises. Ils sont à peu près 50 000 transporteurs qui ont donc 50 à 800 camions. Donc le risque, c'est que leur coût de retour à ville soit important. Et le gain, c'est qu'ils veulent réduire ce coût. Deuxième segment de clients, qui ont des besoins totalement différents en fait, c'est les petites et moyennes entreprises. Ils sont à peu près 350 000 transporteurs, opérateurs de transport. Ils sont entre 1 et 50 camions. Donc, le problème, c'est d'atteindre les expéditeurs parce qu'en fait, ils n'ont pas tourné, ils n'ont pas de plan de charge, ils ne savent pas quoi faire demain. Leur gain, c'est en fait proposer à ce problème, c'est d'augmenter le chiffre d'affaires quand même. Pas de réduire les coûts, mais d'augmenter le chiffre d'affaires.
And so what is your value proposition for the SME segment specifically? How do you? Yeah.
C'est de proposer une plateforme internet qui fait la liaison, qui connecte l'expéditeur au transporteur. C'est-à-dire le transporteur peut mettre son retour à vie, l'expéditeur pourra consulter cette annonce et la réserver. Bien le contraire, c'est l'expéditeur qui a un besoin trop grand, qui proprement pas donné, il émet son besoin, il a besoin de 20 camions par exemple pour la semaine prochaine,
le transporteur pourra consulter cette annonce-là et
It's on.
That was terrific. Again, our purpose is to demonstrate and illustrate a method of thinking that gets to messaging and sales. And so the differences between the two market segments that you identified, very important and relevant differences on how you end up messaging to them. And the value proposition to each are different. And so if you think now about how do I frame this message in a way that appeals to those different segments? For the big companies, the very large ones with so many trucks, they're all about efficiency. And they've lost efficiency by having costs of wear and tear on the truck, petrol, staff time, an empty truck coming home is inefficient. That is just pure cost. If I had a full load coming home, I've got efficiency. And I'm not incurring extra cost. I'm in fact covering that cost of the return trip. So that a big corporation is very, very interested in efficiencies. And that's one of the implications of the pain and the gain and the value proposition that you have worked out. Interestingly, for the SME, they want to be efficient, but that's not a primary thing. They're struggling to succeed. What you offer them is customer acquisition. What you offer them is increased sales. What you offer them is doubling their sales. You got a load going out, get a load coming back. And that customer acquisition speaks to exactly what the SME needs. The SME needs volume, needs sales, needs more customers, more revenue. It is inefficient for them to have an empty truck coming back. But the pain that they have is far less that inefficiency and far more the need for expanding their customer base and increasing revenues. Might not be as I guess what I'm trying to say, I should try it better. They're mirror images of each other. For the large corporation, efficiency might be more important than new customer acquisition and I got business coming back. But it's flipped for the SME. The new business might be more important than the efficiency. Both of them are benefits, both of them are things that are valuable, but what will speak to the mindset of your customer segment might be different.
And I understand that you have made something of a pivot. And so when you spoke to your large clients and your small clients, does that differentiator ring true, that the small clients have a very different sort of need, that they're seeking market acquisition? Okay, all right, excellent. Okay, we have another volunteer, also in the front row.
Pour l'entreprise viticole. Nous avons essentiellement 5 segments de marché, mais les hôpitaux publics représentent pratiquement 93% du marché. C'est la caractéristique principale. Donc, l'Organisation mondiale de la santé recommande un infirmier pour 3 lits. Cette norme n'est jamais respectée. On se retrouve dans pratiquement tous les pays un infirmier qui gère de 7 jusqu'à 16 lits. Donc c'est vraiment un grand problème pour les infirmiers. Deuxièmement, selon nos travaux qu'on a fait auprès de grands hôpitaux en Algérie, la perfusion se pratique avec un ratio de 1,6 perfusions par lit par jour. Donc, il y a toujours une perfusion qui se pratique dans chaque lit d'hospitalisation. Donc, puisque la perfusion se pratique d'une façon manuelle, elle est sous-surveillée. il y a beaucoup d'accidents et d'incidents qui arrivent. Le moindre accident, c'est le passage des solutions hors de la veine. Parfois, il y a des drogues qui sont nocives pour les malades et qui peuvent léser le patient. Donc, notre machine a trois avantages. Le premier avantage, c'est qu'elle va sécuriser le processus de la perfusion pour le malade. Donc, deuxièmement, elle va diminuer la charge de travail pour les infirmiers. Et troisièmement, pour l'administration de l'hôpital, parce que c'est elle qui décide d'acheter les machines. Notre machine n'a pas de consommable. Donc, quand ils acquièrent la machine, il n'y a pas de consommable derrière. Essentiellement, les valeurs.
One of the things that always surprises me is how hard we have to work to deliver value to people who already know what they're doing. So that was really good, and very important later on, the fact that this market segment is 93% makes it the most important segment for your business. And it was great the way in which you were able to identify different pains and different gains. And I would add, and you did this, I just would point out for everybody that within the market segment, there are stakeholders who have different interests. There's the overworked nurse. There's the administration that is interested in cutting down on the consumables. I've worked with many medical device companies, and if they've got consumables, they love it, because once I get my product into your hospital, you got to buy from me all the time. And hospitals are very much aware of that and know that if they can avoid that, that's a great savings for them. But the nurse doesn't care about that too much, although it affects the nurse's job. The replacement of consumables takes time and energy. So at any rate, thinking about the different stakeholders in the hospital and the different benefits that are brought to bear, who would be the decision maker in a public hospital? Who would decide what to do? And then you have to sort of think about, in that person's mind, what is the hierarchy of their worry about things? And maybe they don't care that nurses are overworked. Maybe they do care about compliance. And if the best practice, if the standard, and maybe even a regulation is a ratio of nurse to beds, and they're in violation, bringing back into compliance with best practices or the recommendation or the regulation, that might be a motivator. And a hierarchy of those interests will help you structure your message to them, because you want to deliver very quickly and at the top the main thing that they really, really want, the main thing that solves the biggest problem. And then they are, wow, I'm interested. And then, oh, on top of that, I'll have this benefit and this benefit and this benefit. So structuring your communication so that your main message addresses the main pain, and your subordinate messages build upon it in order to make it easier and easier for the person to say yes.
And this is getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but we do have a tool that we'll be looking at in the afternoon that does precisely that asks you to put in a hierarchy all of the messages, all of the very key points, and then arrange them to best fit the listener, your particular customer segment. So that's why being very thorough about all of this is very useful. And also thinking, to John's point, what the nurse's perspective is and why it is good for him or her, for the administrator thinking about the cost of nurses, the regulatory environment, and so on. So, well done. Let's get it, at least, excellent, all right.
segment, cultural rights and rooms, characteristic technology users. Saying receives 5 times the same ugly set, 2 cents. Again, receiving the gift they wish and they need for their future house. Value proposition for future brides and grooms who want to receive the gift they wish and they need for their wedding. Our wedding registry is an online gift wish list that avoids bride and groom to receive the same gift by creating and sharing their own gift list in live shops. Our wedding registry ensures them to receive not only the gift they want, but also not having the 15 times sales participants.
That was very succinctly stated. Very well done. I don't know anything about your market in Algeria, but I am wondering, of course, wedding registries are familiar to many elsewhere, and I'm wondering whether you have statistics that you can add into this message, not necessarily right now, you might not have them, you might, that say, it's proven that in the French market, wedding registries cut the time required by such and such, or 70% of all couples, that sort of thing. Are there such additional benefits or comparative benefits?
Because wish list doesn't exist in Algeria yet. So I'm not familiar with this kind of list, right?
Mm-hmm.
So giving statistics.
I don't know, perhaps people are not interested in doing what such and such a market does, but perhaps they're more interested in other markets. Maybe, they want to know what happens in Paris, or they want to be like what happens in New York, or so obviously tailoring that to whatever the market might be interested in. And I also wonder about the level of pain, because you've said a lot of things that are very nice, and certainly those are important from the perspective of those giving the gifts. From the perspective of those creating the wedding, there's so many things to think about. Just the time seems to me to be a huge pain. Organizing it all or communicating it all and doing it online is a savings or of some sort. So I don't know if that's an important part of the message. Perhaps it isn't.
Very important.
Your primary things.
Well, I only have like 2 things to add. One of them is that this is a great opportunity for people to, building on this last point about the pain and all the benefits, there's a distinction between something that is very, very nice to have, and between that and something that I absolutely have to have. And what in messaging, what we're looking for is getting people to see I have to have it. Not that it would be very, very nice to have. And that's part of what we're talking about when we say that the benefits are nice, the benefits are good, we like that, but they often are not enough to tip the decision process. And framing it in terms of what you gotta have tips the decision process, and then the benefits make me feel good about having decided yes. And so if the main problem is time, then, and that's the reason why you gotta have it, all the other benefits, you won't get duplicates, people will know what's happening, they can register and you'll know what's going on. All of those benefits will reinforce my choice that I did the right thing when you convinced me that I had to have it. And so my second point to add is, who has that problem? In Algeria, at a wedding, who organizes? Is it the bride? Is it the parents? Is it the bride and groom together? Who is the decision maker who will decide whether to buy and to use the platform? The parents? Everyone. Then
So the guests,
The guests.
So maybe then you could frame the problem in a way that addresses how very, very hard it is to have 1 million people involved in a decision making. That it streamlines, it simplifies, it aligns people, it brings them together, it enables everybody to have their say, to have a voice, to have it count, and it aggregates and integrates into a complete system. And now, instead of a headache of everybody involved in organizing the wedding, I feel like I gotta have it, or else I'll be, talking to uncles and aunts and guests forever about things that I don't have time to do. I made all that up.
The other thing I thought of, and again, this may or may not be applicable, but one of the reasons that I personally, as a guest at weddings, like about the online registry is that if I don't know the people very well and don't want to spend a lot of money, I will choose a gift that is not very expensive. But if they are a very close relative, then of course I will spend more. And so being able to make that choice from the guest perspective, maybe marketing it to the guests is also a part of, maybe that's a customer segment that I'm sure you've thought of. But I think it would be a major. It would be almost a greater gain for the guests than for the couple themselves.
Now we have more guests back from our website than websites.
So I think it becomes peer pressure. You're getting married? You should use this registry. It's great.
Truly. And this is the idea of knowing your customer, knowing how they think and how they feel. But if one of the main concerns of everybody involved in the wedding process is maintaining good relationships with everybody, to be able to offer your product as a way to avoid conflicts, if conflicts and disagreements and disputes ruin the feel and the happiness and the joy of the event. And they hurt everyone's relationship. Our biggest fear, you're getting married? We're going to have a lot of our relatives angry at us if we don't manage this process well. So getting at what is the big fear, what is the big concern, that's the way to address, you need to have it. You need to have it to make it go smoothly, to make it less conflict-filled, to have everybody aligned and happy together. That is a way of, you hear it and go, I have to have it. That would be great if I could solve that. And then all of the other benefits tip the scale. Remember that when we began with 2 obstacles in the selling process. One is that people prefer to avoid a loss more than they prefer to win a gain. Avoiding a loss is, I need to have it. Having a gain is, it's nice to have it. And so identifying your message and framing it to make it a need to have is addressing the problem, the desire to avoid a loss decisions.
So we are going to continue to use everybody's examples in this way and to learn from each other. So the next time we do an exercise, I'm going to be asking those who have not spoken so far. So everybody needs to get ready to help us all learn together. Right now, we have reached the point at which we will have a 15-minute break. Very brief break, and 10 minutes, I'm sorry, 10 minutes, a 10-minute break, and then we will come back and continue on.